So it's been a minute, but that's what happens when you're looking for work in between doing other things. Uh, we'll do a quick recap of what we've done so far, and then we'll just take a look at what we've got, see if it's ready for actual eyes to work on, and then see if there's anything else that needs to be done. So today is our product day, so we will talk about producty things. Okay, let's take a look. I think it's funny that unassigned is on there, but that's me. All right, so let's take a look at them. This should be in order of what needs to be done, so let's take a look at the first one. Okay, so as a user, I want the ability to choose what kind of journal entry I want to add to Feeler's wheel. If I open the app from a cold start, when the app loads, then show the screen with 2 button prompts. They'll have the following text, I am feeling, and that just happened. If I select one of the options, then take me to a blank page with the title of the flow shown. So this is to just get that first page started, and then probably link up the other pages later. The reason it's written as taking the person to a blank page after interaction is because the button interaction along with this is, it makes sense to do this all at once. There's really no reason to complete this, or maybe there is. That might be something that would be better to discuss with your team, to see if they could just start with this, commit it, and then call it good, and leave the button functionality for linking the two later. Who knows? As long as you're capturing that in some way to make sure that you aren't going to miss it in the future. That's happened before when Apple added in its own form of login. We prioritize putting the login together. We're building it out on both sides for Android and iOS. That was a bear at that time for Android, but then didn't add in, if I recall, we didn't add Google sign-in on the Android side because for some reason we had thought to do it on iOS and then just didn't write a ticket for Android side. And because none of us, we were so in the thick of dealing with the iOS login, we just forgot. So we had to kind of speed run getting that together for Android side. Would I do that now? No. But it's a funny thing when you start splitting things apart. Just make sure that you're capturing it so that you don't forget it in the future. Otherwise, you just have some buttons that do nothing when you're trying to test this. So I feel like this could all be done in one go, though, to take them to the next pages. I'm working alone, so it's not as if these would be done in parallel, but it might make sense. But yeah, there's no design for this because we're not at that step yet. This is just to add a couple of buttons to the screen to do something, and then we can put some UI on top of it later. This makes sense to me. If we were doing sizing, that can be an exercise that would be interesting to do sometime. I think as we get more people in the room, we could try and do planning poker or talk about t-shirt size, like whatever it is that you do. I think since we're talking about it and this is the product day, story points and sizing is something important to set as like I guess opinion's the word for this. There really isn't a factual way of doing this because neither of them really have a like definitive thing that says story points are this. I can give you what the majority of folks say, which is story points are meant to be abstract. They're meant to be without meaning because they are supposed to be a guess at complexity. And complexity does not equal time because complexity in the case of one person might be different in the case of another person. There is no direct mapping of, 2 story points is a day of work. That doesn't exist. If someone's telling you that it does, that is something they've added on top of the framework and is not always true. And from the jump here, I can't tell you how long this will take me. because one of the things with this project that I want to try and do is to use Compose. I am an old head. I've been doing this for a very long time. I still am the most comfortable working with XML to build Android layouts, and I could build that in less than a day. But because I have to learn Compose, it's going to take me longer. And from my last experience with Compose, it will be difficult. So I can't tell you, like, the complexity of this. If I was to just look at this and say, oh, yeah, how do we put that together? It's probably a 1 or a 2. It's a page with 2 buttons, and the buttons go somewhere. That's pretty standard Android fare. But even though it's not complex, given what I just said about how we're doing it, that would add complexity. And that would mean we could add more story points to it. So now it's getting up to a 3 or a 5, maybe. Again, like, how do I assign story points to how long it's going to take me to learn something? You can't. It's an unknowable thing. That's kind of how that works out. So because we don't have a way of doing the same work multiple times, let's rephrase that. Each of these tickets, in my experience, are going to include things that you've done before. Some of them do. Like I said, if I was doing this normally, it would just be, throw some buttons on a page, make them do something when you interact with a button. Cool. If I was building the UI on top of this, that's something different. It depends on how that's been put together. It depends on what the experience needs to be, all these other things. It's the same with other tickets as you move forward in the project. Sure, there may be things in there that you do all the time, but there are also pieces of it that are more or less being seen for the first time. And how you put that together, especially when you're putting together anything front end, is subjective. There are 1,000 ways to put together UI. You got to figure out which one works. That takes time. And especially as UI frameworks evolve, if for those of you who've been on Android for a very long time, you probably recognize the amount of times it's changed and like how we've had to include that moving forward. Like relative layout used to be the thing, and now we're in constraint layouts. Like it was a big day when we got those, but again, we got to move them into constraint layouts now, or when to just use a regular linear layout. Like you can see how, yeah, we've built out front end, hundreds of times, but I can't tell you how long it'll take until I start putting it together to make sure that it looks as much like the picture as I can. And all that to say, I can't tell you how long story points will take because I don't know how much work is going to go into it. And that's why they're a guess at something not real, which is complexity. So what it's meant to say is how much complexity are we feeling like we want to handle. And that's if you want to get into sprints. Like that's, again, you can see like these things aren't exactly, agile methodology stuff. Like there's nothing in the original manifesto or like pieces that have come after it that are like, oh yeah, no, you got to make sure you do everything in like 2-week increments and that you do this and you do this. Those are things that have come up as a result of working with it and have worked for certain teams. But what they forget in the end is that that's a process. That's a process that worked for a particular team. That process came about from multiple iterations of that team working through what worked for them. And if you don't look at those processes like that from the start and you just take them at their face value, that's when you start ending up with, well, Agile's bad because Scrum is terrible. 2-week sprints are the worst thing ever. And it's like, correct, Scrum might be terrible for your team. That is a process. Agile tells you if a process doesn't work for you, you throw it away and you try something new. So that's the thing. So when you're using story points, it's the same thing. Story points are a process that were created years ago, have evolved over time into what they are, you know, accepted or not accepted as now. And if they're serving you, great. If they're not serving you, not great. Get rid of them. But the thing to not do is to start trying to attach things like time to something that isn't even real, like isn't even meant to be a discrete measure. So, all that rambling to say, if we were doing story points, for me, there is no time associated with them because you cannot make a direct link from complexity to time. It would be to placate somebody who just wants us to be on Scrum. It would be there such that we would not be making somebody mad when they look at our board and wonder what's going on. There's a lot of things that there's a lot of things that are done in Agile that are unfortunately so clasped onto. I keep moving all over the place on this because I've been at this for so long. I have a lot of opinions. So in this case, story points don't make sense. We're on a Kanban board. We are on an unrestricted timeline of like what it is we're building, when it releases, all of that. So it's not like we need anything that's tracking progress towards the end so that we can then pivot. Oh man. Okay. So today's kind of turning into a rant day about like how this process can be put together. Yeah, that's a lot of just random information. What would be better to do in this situation? I'm trying to think what might be a better way to put this. Because this isn't particularly product, but it's usually driven by product to have this be done in a certain way. The developers, let's just talk about Agile. Why not? Okay, I think that'll be fine. So, Agile is something that was created in response to trying to make software dev kind of work with regular product development. And please feel free to correct me, as this is my perception of it, and the more information we get, the better the picture will look. But the big difference would be that, and you may have learned this, but the term for it is there's like a waterfall model. And when you're building physical items, barring any like production mishaps, you can usually get a good guess at how long it will take to build something. I know how long the machine die takes to run. I have a general estimate on how much time it takes to swap these things out. Like I've got years worth of data on how a machine that presses aluminum cans into shape, like how much time it takes to press, how many it can do in a given amount of time. Like all of these things exist because they exist in a space that's pretty organized. And I can take an average case of how long something will take in order to then give a guess at, okay, yeah, you need 10,000 aluminum cans. I can make 100 a day, so it'll take that many, what is that, 100 days? I can do math. Yeah, so that's how many days it should take before I build them. Shipping for something at that large of a volume is usually this many days. So you would, if we were to start production tomorrow, you would have your cans in this number of days. And that makes sense, right? The waterfall too would be for when you had multiple steps to it. So if I'm producing a soda, then yeah, I'm going to need the aluminum cans and then how much time it takes for that. I'm going to need the amount of time it takes to process and create the soda itself. Then the canning process of putting the soda into the cans and shipping. So in that process, there are steps that are quantifiable because I know how long it takes to make the soda mixture. And again, barring any weird production issues, they do happen. But the idea is like you can see when you're making a physical product, a known physical product. Let's be clear about that. We're not including like the R&D for uh, like the machine that puts the cans together. When you have a known physical product, you can give estimates on how long it'll take. And when you move into a new form of product, so software development like this, um, you end up with people trying to hold on to that old thing, that old piece of, well, how long should this take? How long would it take to put this together? Like, if I was to show somebody these 4 tickets here and say, how long would it take to put this together? They have no idea. Like, there's stuff in here that needs to be considered. There are items that should and shouldn't be put together. And that takes time and planning to figure out how to build it, because there really isn't a standard way of putting these items together such that they just work the same every time. If we were building it without a visual interface, maybe, like, I can tell you that, yeah, it takes about this long to put a couple of buttons on a screen and make them go somewhere. And then, yeah, it takes about this long to do this, and it takes this long to do this. But in between is subjectivity. So what you're starting to see is that, like, these models for software dev, because they're so rapid in their iteration, are more like an evolutionary model where you're kind of just in this cloud rotating as you try and figure out what you should be doing next. It's a moving target all the time. I can't estimate how long it will take to hit a moving target because I don't know how fast or slow the target's moving. I don't know where it's moving to. I don't know how to find it. You know, like, there's a lot of these things that are just so prone to subjectivity that you can't state how long it will take to build it. You don't know. I have had it in my time where I would build something that was to spec, and then we'll look at it and we'll interact with it, and it'll be like, we don't like it. Even with tacit agreement from the stakeholders, say, oh yeah, no, that's what we want. Yeah, that's exactly what we wanted. It doesn't always work like that. And because software is abstract and intangible, to be honest, yes, I know you can interact with software by clicking, but everything in that system is intangible. It's not like you can take the software and then just kind of change it while you're running it. Like, it doesn't do that. It's not like I have a thing of muffins in here. I can change the shape of the muffin if I wanted flat muffins. I don't have to go back in and make a bunch of changes, re-release it, so that then you can have a flat muffin. No, it's right there. So because of that nature of it being so abstract and intangible, people get this feeling that it's like infinitely malleable. And unfortunately it is. So you end up with this weird loop of, hey, we understand that anything can be done. Like, given whatever, we can build whatever you want, but also I want it built in this amount of time. Can you do that? And the answer is, I have no idea. Maybe. And again, that's because of this old way of thinking of, well, we write software every day, we should be able to estimate it. Or we do this all the time, we should be able to estimate it. It's like, no. No, we can't. And that's what Agile is trying to mitigate, is they want to close the loop on handling change. And that is why when you look at like the principles, or if you read the short manifesto, the Agile I mean, it's right here. I have it on here all the time. You'll see that a lot of what this is about is communicating constantly, like individuals and interactions. Like, yes, I am speaking to you about what this thing is. Software over documentation is its own deal. Comprehensive documentation is the key word there. But, we want something that we can see such that we can talk about it. Like, that's more important than something we can see and has a 12-page set of documentation about it. Like, we want to look at it. We want to be able to assess if it's serving our needs. And that's another piece about this. Everything about this is it serving our needs? And then the customer collaboration over contract negotiation, yeah, that's, again, we can't negotiate a contract with a timeline because we don't know what a timeline is, because we're constantly changing, because this medium allows us to do so without having to worry about anything but lost time, which, to be fair, is really, time is the only thing we can't get back. But that's the thing. Like, we want to be able to deal with change, as is the fourth one on there, responding to change over following a plan. If we're stringent to a plan, we'll never be able to handle when we find out, oh, well, this isn't going to work. So what do? Do we just keep going forwards? Like, no, I understand that the plan was to do it this way, but we have now learned things, and we shouldn't do it that way. So we should be open to change. And, like, that's the core of it. It's trying to move us away from these, like, endless change orders or re-estimates or all of these things that then turn into, just turn into a lot of headaches and confused people. And then if you go further, you can see I've clicked this link so many times. We look at the principles about it. And if you look, there's really nothing in here about timelines and estimates and just what you should be doing to make sure you hit a deadline. Like, it doesn't exist, because the idea is supposed to be that we're working with each other to rapidly evolve, and we're doing it so quickly that we're knocking it out of the park each time, because we're working with what we have. That's the best information for that given period of time. So that's the thing. Like, we want to satisfy the customer through early and continuous delivery. So this is the part where, when you're building something, they talk about the minimum viable product, like we talked about the first round. That's why that's important, because I can give you the smallest thing for you to criticize and then not outwardly damage the work we've done. It's here's a thing that we can get data on and make changes to. This isn't something that took us a year and a half to put together, and now we've lost a year and a half. No, we've lost the shortest period of time that we can. And that's why then we go into the second piece of it. So changing requirements even late in development. Competitive advantage. It's the same thing, because we're releasing so often and we're releasing so small. It's fine. Change is fine. We know that we're going to either move things around or all of these things are being based off of very nice data-driven pieces. So that's how you keep moving forward. Business people and developers must work together daily throughout the project. All right, this is a very old thing. Some companies, it may still be like this, and you might encounter it when you're contracting. But it used to be that you had like multiple separate entities that worked to come to a conclusion on what you were putting together, and there was multiple sign-offs. There was this whole, if I recall, it's called like an SRS. And it's this long page document with like pictures and arrows and like descriptions on what it is you're building and like what you're doing it for and all of these things. And it's very rigid. and it follows that waterfall model like to a T, because it's like it starts at the top, goes down a step, they augment it so that it's now turning into requirements. It goes down a step, it gets augmented so it turns into user experience and UI. It goes down a step and it gets signed off on each time until final sign off, and then it just gets handed off as like this book of things to put together, and then the developers just did it, and there was no involvement at that point. And if it got to the developers and they're like, there are things in here we can't do, well, then it had to start all over again because you had to get your signatures, you had to get the sign offs, you had to make the changes. So that's why it's talking about this: business people and developers must work together daily. It's the reason we have product owners. Like, it's meant to be somebody who bridges that stakeholder interaction, so that like that's your lead developer, that's your product owner, that's your product designer. This group of three that are able to work together to respond to stakeholder demands, and not have to have everybody sit idle until you get 17 signatures to say, yeah, no, this is good. And then when the developers get it, go, no, it's not. So that's what that means. It's funny. Like, it hasn't been like that for a while. Like I said, in some places it still is a little bit, but that's where that comes from. It used to be just so split apart. Sad. Build projects around motivated individuals, given the environment support they need. This will date any conversation about any future people watching this, but yeah, I think everybody forgot this one. We're dealing with massive return to office mandates from Amazon that are just going to demotivate all of their people. We've got more layoffs than I've ever seen in my working lifetime, and just yeah, that one needs the moment of silence that it deserves. But let's talk about this from the small case. Let's talk about it from a point that I can control rather than from a company-wide standpoint. This is probably the most important part of the whole deal. We're talking about building things that we care to build. There are parts, I've had a previous product owner call it eating your vegetables, where you're just kind of putting together unexciting but important things and making sure that those get released. But when your developers and product people and leads and like everybody in that like cluster that are focused on this are not motivated about what they're building, good luck getting anything done, because it's a short trip to find something that is interesting. So it's important to keep everybody motivated, and those long waterfall lines that I explained earlier really aren't motivating. Sitting around waiting to see if they approve or tell you to do something anyway. Trusting them to get the job done is another huge thing. That's the whole point of being a team. But yeah, so the most efficient, effective method of conveying information is face-to-face conversation. In this world of like remote work, kind of. I mean, this would be, when was this site put together? I want to say early 2000s, maybe even like 2000. I'm trying to remember what the landscape would have looked like then. I believe there was enough communication over the internet, but not in like the focused way that we kind of have now. Like, comparing Discord to what we had then would be like space flight to air flight. Like, it's just, there's so much more it can do and explore and provide than when this was written. So face to face, yes, but what this was in context to was, again, that long line of disconnected people writing their own pieces, signing off, and shipping it to the next person. So there was no time where those individual parts spoke to each other unless there was an issue. And again, then it went back and was individually done all the way down. So that is what this means. It does not mean that everybody needs to be in the office looking at each other like within touching distance to say that that's the best way we can get things done. That's not what this means. Again, with context, this is a product of its time when teams did not speak to each other through anything but this document that was slowly being handed down. So that's what this means. Slack and Discord and, to a lesser extent, Teams all facilitate this at some level. So I would wonder if we could update that to utilizing person-to-person conversation. But yeah, that's what that means. Working software is the primary measure of progress. This again would have been from a time when you would be working on something for multiple months or years before it got out to somebody, and it just, how would you know if anything was working? You wouldn't. And by working, is it performing what we want it to? Is it performing the needs that our users have? Is it able to meet those needs? You can't say it is if it is working, say it passes QA and everything, but hasn't been released. So without that, how do we know we've made progress? How do we know we're doing what we're supposed to be doing? We don't. So that's, again, pieces of this product of their time, but also pieces of this still relevant today. Released software that works is a primary measure of our progress. Get as many nines on the side of that period as you can for uptime and crashes. Do it. Nice crash-free working sessions. Constant pace indefinitely for promoting sustainable development. It's the goal. It's not always what's going to happen. Again, I rambled at length about how I can't estimate how long something's going to take, or what the complexity of something means, or why trying to do things in 2-week intervals can be difficult. So constant pace may vary, but it's meant to be that you don't end up sitting idle, at least in the context for me. Something is always moving forward at a maintainable pace. So it's not like everybody's bending over backwards to make sure that there's just as much work as possible all the time, but it also means that we're recognizing our bottlenecks. We are doing our best to ensure that we're handling changes as quickly as we can, pivoting and moving forward. And we're hoping that these changes and work that needs to be done by the different members of our team is doing so such that nobody has to sit idle and wait. So constant pace indefinitely, meaning, again, we're not waiting for 17 signatures to sign off on a change order that's so important that it's blocking members of the team. So that's what that means. Continuous attention to technical excellence and good design enhances agility. For those of us that are developers, you could understand why maintaining good code makes it so that you can keep maintaining good code. If it's written well in the beginning, then it's written well in the future. If it's understandable in the beginning, it's understandable in the future. And that is why I harp so hard on how these tickets are put together, just from the start, why that's so important. And that's because I need to be able to understand why something was put together the way it was. And the only way I can do that is either through thorough documentation, which, in my experience, there have not been enough team members to perform that regularly, or we are intentional in each of our in each of these iterations that we're doing, that we are keeping track of these changes. So when I 10 years from now want to know why the landing page was built that way, I'll either have this ticket to look at, which tells me exactly what it is that we're wanting to do and why we're doing it, or I'll have the one that came after it that made a change to it. It's why we also do, for my teams, it's why we also put the ticket number in the commit for whatever it is we're working on, so that we can do a git blame. We can see when that piece was worked on, come back to it, see the ticket, come back to the ticket, and then understand why it was built the way it was built. It's a nice loose form of documentation that's important. So that's why it's so important to have technical excellence from the start. Like, this will become your only form of context in the future, in 2 months, in a year, in 5 years. So if you're doing the work in the beginning, it will save you in the end. So that's why that's important. The other pieces of this here is what's the next one? Simplicity, the art of maximizing the amount of work not done, is essential. Again, this is probably the most important. Understanding what you shouldn't be doing, understanding what you are not doing, and committing to items that are important and stating which ones aren't important is extremely, extremely good. So, like, when we wrote, and here, let me pull this up. When we wrote our one-pager last time, one of the things that we talked about was what's out of scope. And that's what this is talking about. We need to know what we aren't doing so that we can say we've done the MVP, we've done the minimum viable project, and we are not allowing any other exciting or, what we think we may need as far as features to creep in, increase scope, and then make it so that this never finishes. So it's important to understand what you are not doing, and taking the time to agree on that will save you exponential amounts of time. Because again, I can't tell you how long something will take to do, but if I can tell you not to do it, I know exactly how long it takes to not do something. So we've now removed this ambiguous amount of time from our future scope, which is great. And that's why that's important. So we don't just continually cram things in because we may or may not know that they're worth the time to do. Do they fit in with the MVP? Do they fit in with the goals of the team? Do they fit in with the goals of product? Do they fit in with the goals of the business? That's why all those tiers exist, to again give us the big stick to say, hey, that's not the work that needs to be done, and we can consider that in the future. It's great. The best architectures, requirements, and designs emerge from self-organizing teams. Mostly because, so this is something that was difficult in some orgs that went agile. I got to watch one grow through choosing to become agile, and it was a very interesting experience. But like, the flattening of a lot of responsibilities is fascinating, and what it can help do is create a team of people working on something that feels like they're a team working together on it. Like, it's adjusted a lot of like what we expect from our development teams in terms of like what your title means and what you're actually doing. it moved, at least in my opinion, it's moving more towards like you support your team and the years of experience you have are there because you are meant to be a supporting piece of it. So it means that we don't just have a, you know, actually, this could mean a lot of things. I wanted to, the thought train I was running down on that was, it makes it so that it's not just an architect that will put something like this together. They can and should work with other like motivated individuals, build them around motivated individuals. Well, a self-organizing team would be motivated, but that they don't have to work in a silo to put this thing together. Same with requirements and designs. Like for requirements, for those that are working in agile organizations, one of the pieces for requirements is everybody takes a look at the ticket before you start work on it. Like they call it refinement or grooming or what have you. And it means that something is presented to the team for the chance to look and make sure that it fits in with what everybody understands. And that's kind of where this is getting at, because like self-organizing is fascinating. I know Spotify is big for self-organizing teams into pods. I have unfortunately not worked in a company that has done something like that. It's usually everybody's assigned to like maintain a certain function, so there isn't a lot of like cross pollination between different functions and teams, and that makes sense in a lot of ways, and I can see why it wouldn't in other ways, but like it's difficult as a project becomes the size that it does. Like, yes, but the idea here for me at least is that these three items, architectures, requirements, and designs, they emerge from teams. They don't emerge from an individual. Like, it's not just here's the design, that's it. Like, well, let's talk about it. Like, especially if it's something that's impossible to do, or if it's outside of what our users expect. There are whole documentation. There's in my world for Android and iOS, both of them have a respective like design documentation framework. For Android, it's material design. For iOS, it's the human interface guidelines that talk about like what people want, what the people's expectations were for these particular UI elements. And it comes from talking to users and doing the research. So it's the same thing. Like, it's understanding that, yes, these are it's now I'm tripping over it, but it's meant to be like someone who is showing designs for the first time may not be aware that that's a new this one's, now I'm having difficulty with this. It's the idea. Let's get away from the specific example and let's just do a very stringent example. Your team has good ideas. Your team has diverse experiences. Do you need everybody that you can find? No. Do you need to work with your self-organizing team that will be working on this to ensure that we've covered as many bases as we can? Yes, it's a good idea. It's why we do design, like that's why in other places I worked, the product designers all have a design review where they talk to each other, and there's a moment where the product designer on that team presents that to the team so that they too can see and understand and bring up anything that may block work. Same thing with requirements. Do the requirements come from our product teams? Yes. Do they talk to each other about it? Yes. Do they talk with the team about it during refinement? Yes. It's to ensure that it's understood. It's to ensure that it's feasible. It's to ensure like all those pieces. Same with architecture. If we're talking about putting, some huge architecture together to handle the hundreds of thousands of users that are going to hit this site at, given intervals because it's based on an event. It's important to talk about. Members of your team have context on how to handle that, and taking a look at your architecture and understanding it helps ensure that it does the things you say it will. So I think if I was to take something away from this, because self-organizing teams isn't as much of a thing as it could be as projects grow larger. It's just, it comes from your team. Don't do it yourself. And then the last one, at regular intervals, the team reflects on how to become more effective and tunes and adjusts its behavior accordingly. Remember when I mentioned earlier, if something's not serving you, you get rid of it? That's what this is meant to do. I feel like that was probably the original intent of Scrum, was to say, hey, we do as much as we can in this period of time, and we talk about how we did it. And it's kind of evolved into we're going to do everything in these 2 weeks, and we're going to try and estimate that and then hope it works out. And that's kind of not worked. So that's the idea there is, that's why retrospective is important. You should be in regular and short, this isn't something you should do quarterly, but you should be at a very short regular interval going over what you did, and is it still working out for you, and what went wrong and why it went wrong, and what went right and why it went right, and should we continue doing that thing that went right, or was it just a one-time thing that was effective for this? All those things are important. So you can see here why what we do now is not as much like it, what we were looking at before. It's not a lot like these Agile principles. So it's funny because it's usually boiling down to a no true Scotsman argument whenever you're just like, yeah, well, that's not what Agile actually is. And 90% of the time, honestly, probably isn't, because Agile wouldn't have Scrum if Scrum wasn't working for your team. You would stop doing Scrum and try something else. Agile wouldn't have story points if story points aren't working for your team. You would get rid of them and try something else. And that's what's important, is the desire to try something else. And that's the hard part, because change is difficult. But what's even worse is holding on to something that doesn't work. So that's all the Agile stuff. I think this is product-y enough, because it gets into kind of just management of a project in general. This is usually more of a shared responsibility between the teams that are working together. And I mean that in the sense of your feature team that has the product owner, the product designer, the developers, and then the QA or SDETs. Because they're, depending on your organization, those are either 4 separate orgs or they are some other subset of organizations. But that's what it is. That's your self-organizing quote unquote team that needs to be able to handle this and work together. So yeah, that's what that's what I mean by it needs to be shared, is because everybody needs to be doing something like this. Everybody wants to be involved and aware of ensuring that work is delivered and that we're testing it and making sure we're checking our assumptions. Everybody on a team wants to do that. So that's why these are put together the way they are. They don't speak to anything specific, any one person specifically. It's all team focused. So that's why we do all of this, and that's why we write the tickets out and then talk about them afterwards to make sure that they're going to serve us. And that's why when we start working on this, I'm not going to estimate how long these things will take because I don't believe in it. So yeah. So let's talk about tickets then. That was a good chunk of rambling. if that gets skipped over, if you're interested in something a little more directed, I have written talks about like how important the principles are individually, and it's a lot more coherent than what I just gave. So if there's interest in that, let me know, and then I can make that a part of a stream where I can give that. It's as professional as it gets. It's got slides and everything, and tries to make jokes out of something very dry. So it does exist, but let's get back into what we were looking at before, which is these tickets to make sure that they are ready to be worked on, because that's what we should be doing today. And then I don't think we'll have any other tickets to write because we don't know it just yet. So yeah. I think I'll take a moment here, and I will be right back. I might abandon this stream for saving it on the VOD. That was a very long ramble to no one. But let's just take a look at these. Yeah, that makes sense. We've talked at length about this one. So as a user, I want to be able to select the first step in the process of using the wheel, which is the top level choice of the adjective for the emotion I am feeling. Oh, right. This one was fascinating because we wanted to change up how we were doing this. All right. I'm turning the fan on. It's too hot in here. Oh wow, it just spikes. Yeah, it's fine. If someone comes in, we can turn it off. It's a top level choice. If I'm on that, I select an emotion. Show me the next level. Show me the selected emotion for the next level. Show me that. Then navigate to journal entry. I think what would be proper to do, because keeping these separate is good, we're going to... Oh, that's nice. How very kind of you. Yeah, this used to be a whole... Wow. Finally, Jira. Okay, so... Let's do, task to do summary. Might give it a better one in a minute. This is nice because I can go down to here and block this and that. Oh, how wonderful. Don't need to flag it. This isn't that big of a deal. What? Since when is insertable not a word? It's inconceivable. Separate insertable. Yeah, I feel like... So the reason why this makes sense to me is because the intent should and will always be, let's select one from the middle, we'll select one from the... It keeps saying middle. From the center ring, then for the middle ring, and then the outer ring. And there shouldn't be anything different about making those selections. So for instance, like, there is no reason to insert something in between selecting something from the middle ring, because that's the point. You're supposed to pick something from it. So like changing that function makes no sense. Like, I need you to pick, at the very least, you need to pick from the center ring and then the middle ring. Like, that has to happen in order for us to be doing what this product intends. The outer ring is something that doesn't matter. So like, that can or can't be done. But as a function, like, there is no reason that this should need to change contextually. If it does, then that should be an additional step in whatever flow it is we've chosen. So, as a functionality, this should do that, just this, and do it well. So having it be something, in this case, I'm thinking like a fragment that can be inserted into the chain. Um, that makes sense to me, so that it can be inserted anywhere. Like if I come up with some wild third way of doing this, and I need to make selections from the wheel, then that should be a thing. Um, and if in that third way something else needs to happen before or after the selection, um, that should be how I add these things. I should not be trying to insert steps in between one selection and the other. That doesn't make sense. And if I do that, then it should be something that's done in every case. So it also is nice because if I make this into an A/B test, then I don't have to worry about trying to insert a new piece in there. Like I could just pop this one out and put the B test in. So yeah, I think this makes sense to do it this way, which is why the user story reads, having it being a separate insertable entity makes it so that any changes to this path will propagate it to anything using it. So if for some reason we are given information that there is a better way of making this selection than what it is we're doing, then now we can make sure that everything gets that better way and not have to go through and individually update and remember which ones we updated. It also means that like that's just should be how this is built regardless. And that I can pull out the journal page as another blocker to journal it, and then that should be how that works. So yeah, that's why we're doing that. Heading 1. I can't imagine what this would be like on a tinier screen, but again, I don't think I need all this real estate anyway. Trying to think of what an if when then for this would be. Okay. If I need to. Maybe I can just describe it. Functional. Oh, that's interesting. Okay. Yeah, because I've already written this, so. And you can see how, like, when you start doing stuff like this, that colloquial terms for what you're working on start to come up. This is another like early important thing that you should establish as you move through, because I'm starting to call this the emotion selection flow, and that will stick. The problem is that when it sticks and other people start calling it something else, um, you either need to course correct to that something else if that's the one that's like actually working and ensure that that's how it's written in tickets, or you most definitely need to correct people so that they are stating the correct colloquial term for this, because it's very easy to get confused quite quickly. So I think we'll stick with emotion selection flow because that's what it is and that makes sense, and just fingers crossed that it stays that way the whole time. So yeah, if I have started the emotion selection flow, I want to be presented with top level options as buttons. If I select an emotion, show me the next level, and then if I select emotion from that one, show me the last level of options. I feel like the option to opt out is important because, like, if you take a look at this guy, um, it may be fine just to say that you're mad. I don't think you need to be uh, infuriated. It may not be that high, um, but I would like. Actually, let's not. So this is a good moment to talk about like user research to see if that is something that somebody wants, and then you can add that in later. This is why feature flagging is kind of neat too, because this could be something where we think that it may be needed, and you just do it as an A/B test to see if it's used or not. And if it is, then then everybody gets it. If it's not, then don't worry about it. Or if it's something that that later on you want as an option to opt out of it, it could be added as something, like a user setting or something. So, but because I don't know enough about it, and because like these still, while are strong words, don't really like, they may not completely describe what you're dealing with. Let's stick with using all of the wheel at first, and then we can talk about taking pieces off of it if we need them. I would probably work with the team on what this then should be, because like as a separate function, it should just report that it's done and give that data back to somebody who cares about it. So like updating the app state, it should not handle navigation itself because it's meant to be a drop-in piece. So it does its thing, reports back, and then you can insert the next step. I think of just. I think that's good enough. Like the thing that I don't want to do here is say update app state or whatever, because like there's a lot of things that this could be. There's a lot of ways that we could do this that matter architecturally. So like, okay, so in the context of Android, there's a thing called a view pager, and that's a thing that you like swipe through. Usually when you see like a tutorial with the little dots at the bottom and you swipe through each, that's a view pager. It is, I believe now it's a fragment itself, and it gets inserted into other fragments and can report back to its parent. So it becomes a discussion of like, well, when you're done paging through whatever data it has, you could just report that back to the parent and let the parent handle it. You could also you could also have it such that the view pager itself is aware of the app state and can send an update to it. So if you're like doing I think a React Redux style thing where you just have a global state over the whole thing, that might matter. Um, there's just a lot of like choices you can make here, and this is kind of why I don't want to abandon most of the stuff in the beginning, because you talk about architecture and you talk about like all these decisions. Each one of these are viable. They all make sense. The amount of time for one over the other is negligible in some ways, but also like it's worth discussion. I don't know how long that discussion will take, which is again why I don't know how long estimates will take. It just there's a lot to this, and it's why estimation on this stuff is just it's a difficult concept, and I wish that more entities would understand that, because I truly believe that a lot of folks don't take advantage of this system. That was that whole talk about in the Agile principles about being or having your team be comprised of motivated individuals. Like the people who do this and who enjoy doing it, like they just want to keep coding neat things and see them go out into the world. Like really, that's it. So to think that they would pad the time on it because they are lazy or are whatever, like it's not a good place to start from, and if you don't have evidence of it, then why even assume that in the first place? And that's a whole different problem too. So like this is Jira. Jira is used in a lot of places. I know how long a ticket's been on here because it will tell me. Like I believe it even said, yeah, right here. It tells me that it was created September 10th, and the last time it was updated was after that stream had ended. But like I know when this ticket was assigned to somebody. I know when the ticket was completed. I know when this piece here gets updated. Like it's all here. So it screams pretty loud when somebody is not holding up their end on the team. So again, like having these deadlines and having this, it's just it's ridiculous. And to tie it to certain things, yeah, it's just yeah, I have a difficult time with this because I understand the need to like work in parallel with each other, and maybe some dates do matter over others. I've had it where you want to release something and shoot, I've worked for GoDaddy. We cared about the Super Bowl, but the thing is like if you know when an event is going to happen, then you should be thinking in advance so that you give yourself enough time. I know there's the concept of like if you give somebody a month to do what takes a week, they'll figure out how to make it last a month. Sure, whatever, fine. But the point of it is if you trust them to do it, they'll get it done. So there is no point to this estimation piece. If you're trying to sync it so that your marketing team is able to do it with you, well then the marketing team should be working in parallel so that they can have their stuff ready when the program is ready. And it's the same issue there too. I don't know how long it would take to build marketing material around this. So I should probably give them the time that they need without trying to force them to do it in a certain period of time. So yeah, it's frustrating to have to try and think of these estimations when in the end, they shouldn't matter. Anyway, that's my little side rant for that. What else we got going on? So how's this look? Yeah, having this function be separate and insertable. Yep, start buttons correspond. Yeah, because it's the same thing here. We're not doing labels yet because it's not big enough. And I've got it so that it's blocking those two stories, which I feel is important. Excellent. That's interesting. Why would it pop up like that? Yeah. Cool. So I would definitely make that second as a product owner because I need this because it's blocking these. And then I'll need another one for the journal entry. I'm just going to use the same thing I used here because it is the same use case and I don't feel like remembering what I wrote because I will write something different and either like it or hate it, and that's just kind of how that goes. Adding one, I should just remember that it's Control-Alt-1, but I don't want to. Alright, let's close you out. Interesting. You for a user experience, it's kind of weird. I don't like that it bounces back and forth. You think you'd want what you're interested. Oh my god. Jeez, it's cutting the Y off. This is why you quality assure things. That's unacceptable. There's so much space here, and this is center aligned. And I'm guessing these are center aligned with their boxes. Interesting. With the padding on these, I'm surprised this doesn't have the same. Come on, guys. That's an easy one. You're cutting text off for no reason. How funny. Alright. This is why QA is important, because they'll see crap like that. If I was developing this, I would miss this after the 5th time that I've had to run it and make sure it worked. Like, that's just how that's just what happens when you're developing something over a long period of time. But anyway, yeah, I'm going to have it like that. We're going to do acceptance. Okay, and I think I've written this down too, so let's check. Okay, so the journal entry, excellent. I haven't written that in as a thing. Okay, so here's where I want to take this out of. I want this. If you're wondering why I'm cutting and pasting, it's because my hands on the cutting and pasting like that's because my hands on the mouse and I don't want to reach. I have a fancy ergonomic keyboard, so my buttons are in different places. Oh yeah, I want all of this. Okay. How did I write that here? What was the text I used? Oh, you can only do one at a time. Fascinating. And I can make this wider, but not this wider. Right? Oh, that's... That's a choice. All right. Um, See, and this is why you groom these, because I changed my mind, but I didn't change the top. That's why it's good to have other people look at the stuff you work on. um, but yeah, this should be to start. Okay. Yeah, this is a tough one. I always forget what we put down for stuff like this to do like iterable processes. I'm just gonna do next. Make it easy on my brain. And something that users who are more keen-eyed than I, or excuse me, have a higher level of awareness than some others might notice is there's no like accessibility mentioned, and while putting it in after the fact can be difficult, it's important to like recognize. It should be. It's not so much difficult. Like putting it in afterwards can be easy, but there are times where it does require changes in your hierarchy in order to like easily swipe through. So one of the more like important parts of it, at least for my opinion, is like swipe navigation. And it does matter. The more like elements you get on there, the harder it is to swipe through, especially if you're not like taking control of the zone, so that it's not just forcing the user to swipe through every single bit individually. Like if it can be reported as a whole, you can see why something like this becomes important, because if you leave this just up to the developers to be like, do your best. Most of them are going to be most of them won't need that function, so how would they know? Yeah, the silence was intentional, because it's like you gotta accessibility is important. Accessibility gets you sued. Ask Domino's. So think about it when you have stuff like this. It was something that I used to test for in my apps whenever I would work on them. But what they should do is always a difficult question. So if you can, like, ask the people who use it. We were very lucky on one of our teams that we had a member that was, I don't remember what kind, but they were colorblind. So that helped, even though the app itself really was pretty colorblindness friendly, it still mattered. Like, it mattered for how like we displayed things. So it was just kind of like a generalized ask of, like if anything that we're building or putting together you see, you're just like, I can't grok this, then let us know. But not every team's lucky enough to have somebody that can help them with that. So, yeah, I'm highlighting how important it is. Given I don't have like a UI yet, some of these may not make sense. But the reason, to be honest, the reason I thought about it was that this here, if you were to scroll to the button, then you'll want like speech to text to say why it's disabled, I believe. I need to re-look that up to see what it does. But if I was to just leave it as is, it'll probably just say button next and disabled. But in the context for a sighted person, yeah, no, that, okay, I get it. Like the button enables when I enter stuff, cool. But for someone who can't see the context, what good does that do them? So it's important to think about. So yeah, you get the text box, disabled button, button text should read next. So we don't need that because we just mentioned that above. If I enter text into the box, then enable the next button. If I hit the button to advance and specificity is important, folks, and the next button is enabled. Then report back the data. Okay. So a single step to the user to enter in a journal entry for use in flows. Start, show an editable box, disable button. Button should read next, pardon me. If I have entered text into the box, then enable the next button. If I leave the text box empty or delete all the text in the box, important, it's just whenever the text box is empty, then disable the next button. If I hit the next button to advance and the next button is enabled, then report back the data. So, and it might be worthwhile to state what happens when the button's disabled, but normally you don't. Normally you choose like one of a couple of ways. Either you leave the button enabled the whole time and you put up like an error dialog when they hit it, or you make the editable field do the red box with the error message at the bottom. You can leave the button disabled until they do something, which is probably what I would go with, given that there aren't a lot of fields to fill in, and the user should see the button update as they type things in. A lot of ways to do it, but it's important to think about, because in that case, in those other two cases, then you would want to mention what happens when you press the button and there's nothing in there. In this case, the button's disabled, so if it's disabled, then it can't do anything when you click on it anyway, so that should be enough context. But again, that's why you talk to your team about it after you've done this, so they can tell you what needs to be done. Let's block the 2 pages that need to be blocked from this function. Great. That really wish it wouldn't do that. I don't like that it does that. Journal entry function. Cool. So that makes a lot more sense now. Now I have pieces that are broken out that I can do. Might have to relook at those two just to make sure that they're correct. Because now, what are they asking for? Presented with the I am field. Okay, if I'm on, yeah, this needs to be changed. Presented with the, and because we have a ticket for it, we can put the ticket in. This isn't always the best because as an admin you can archive or just hog delete this ticket. So like I think if I was to mention what was it, Stack Overflow rules, they allow links, but they always require or at least request you to give a short blurb about what's in the link because links don't survive forever. So, like this, if this disappears, that's kind of rough. So, we might just put and then having both helps because then if this exists they can go see it. If it doesn't, then that just tells them how old it is. If I then navigate me to six. I think we're just going to do the I think that's fine. Because, yeah, then you do this, then you do this, then it goes back and says entry saved. And I'm not going to worry about the user backing out of this flow just yet. That might be something we could consider in the future, but I really don't care because I just want people to use this. This will be the same acceptance for the other, just backwards. So I'm not going to worry about like saving a draft or anything just yet. If people want that, then I'll add it. But as far as just like getting this done and useful, this is enough. So feel good about that. Cool. That's broken up into those, and it's apparent. Let's update this one. Oh, it doesn't even have acceptance. Cool. So we're going to paste that in. We're going to cut this. We're going to switcheroo it around. I know where this is going. Okay, so do that. I complete the journal entry flow, edit, paste, and I want to do that. There you go. And then, yeah, I think yeah, because that'll be enough, and then I can figure out if I want to do multiples of these, because as long as these are separate functions, I can insert them as many times as I want. Save that. Alright, that's updated. Does this even have anything in it? When I've gone through and completed either flow, when I intentionally finish that flow, then store my entry on the device for later retrieval. I wonder if I just... yeah. I think that's good enough. You don't really need to state that it's going to be like, you know, a string of X length and the adjectives stored in a certain way. I don't know if that really matters from an or from a product perspective at this moment. They just want you to be able to recover them and show them in a certain way. Like questions as the developer that might matter is like, do you think we'll need the individual selections for some reason, and really it really like it's a good discussion to have with everybody, because like I see this and I want to put it together in a certain way. So putting my developer hat on, if I were reading this, yeah, I would save, you know, a string of some kind somewhere, and then I would also save the emotion adjectives as they are. So like I would have the entry be for, say, if I was doing this in the database, the schema would be the emotion level, so inner, middle, outer, and then the journal entry, so that they were correlated to each other. I think what's rough with that schema, though, is like normalization. But as a data object in the application, it makes sense to have them be separate entities. It makes sense to have a feeling object, or whatever it is that you wish to call it, that has the three of them in there separately, so that they can be utilized later on in a way that's explicit. I think for the schema, since I'd probably be using SQL for it because I like SQLite, I'd probably just normalize that down a little bit, make it so that the journal entry is the main entity, because there's really not going to be what do you call it? I don't think that there would ever be a one-to-many relationship with a emotion, you could normalize them that way because there are a finite number of them. But that would be an interesting thought exercise. I'm like not a great DBA, so I wonder if that would be. But again, so with that thought train I just went on, like how much time did I waste on an implementation detail that may not matter, and doesn't matter to your product owner? It's quite a bit. Like that doesn't matter to them. What matters to them is that it's stored somehow. They don't care how. And that's the main thing with teams that I usually have to work out of them, is that last line there, you could sit and talk about that for a while. Like there's a lot of different things you could do. You could, for example, I talked about normalization. So I would have I'd have a journal entry. I'd probably give it a date too, just because dates are nice. So journal entry and a timestamp, and then I would use that as a foreign key to see what emotions are attached to it. And then what you could do is you could further normalize out the database items such that the emotions are static. So you could have a table that has all of those values in it, and what they're associated to, like all the way down. And what that does is it can create like these relationships that you can join together in like one big query to see who's with what. And you could also just do it kind of lazily, like I had mentioned, where the application's the source for emotions. So say we wanted to add another piece to the inner circle that was abstract enough. So what's in the inner circle right now? I'll just pull this up as like helpful. Angry, disgusted, bad, surprised, happy, fearful. Anxious is part of the fearful, but maybe anxiety becomes something that's better to use as part of the inner circle, or who knows? Like, I'm sure we could, if we sat and thought about it long enough, we could figure out something that could sit in there and be okay. But then what that would need to do is, if the app's the source of truth for them, then the database doesn't care. Like all it's doing is just storing data. So to it, if we had that simple, so let's write some of these down. Where's our old friend Notepad? So like if we were to do, primary key, and then so we would have a journal entry, so this is perfectly fine, because then we'd have that. I probably should have used tabs, because that'll make it so that we can see them. Won't be great, but I could also just pull up Google Sheets. That's probably a better idea. Here, we're learning together, so is there a way to just make a new Google Sheet? So like, yeah, we had like this works just fine, because can I make zoom in? I want to see. No, that'll just make it larger or smaller. Can I just do that? Well, that's neat. Hopefully that works. In the way that I'm hoping it does. So, oh, okay, it does. Neat. So, yeah, so then you would end up with, like, you know, today, happy, what do we got? Happy, accepted, respected. Cool. Cool. So what this does is it makes it so that like none of this has context within the database itself. Like it doesn't know what these mean, and that's okay. Like we're relying on the application to let the database know just what to store. And this is perfectly fine. Like it'll do this. If we were to normalize it though, what we could end up with is like we would have you know, a journal schema that has the primary key. I keep the key here because it matters for like other stuff. Entry. So then all it stores is this. And that then we have the emotions. And we can list them all out. So like so then what you can do is have an entry database, or like a whatever we end up calling it, but like a I'm gonna call it entry because I can't think of a better word right now. So like, or feeling entry. And then it would have journal key and this what's the timestamp? And then you'll end up with like this. So it makes this really fast to retrieve. It makes it so that this list of emotions, like you would want different keys for each of these. So like you'd have like this would be inner, and then you'd have like emotion outer, like all those other ones. So that this just becomes a list of numbers, and that's really easy to like do joins on and just kind of like get the data together. I'll have to read again why normalization is so important, but I do know that this is a way of doing it so that you have everything kind of separated out. I'm kind of I'm interested why, but again, like, you see how long I just sat here and did this? I've wasted the product team's time. This is a fascinating topic, but like this doesn't help them. So that's why you don't want to do that. So let's bring it back in. I wish there was an easier way to get to the outer parts of the screen. How fascinating is, can I like, okay, OBS. This will be something I gotta learn how to do, because that's not what I wanted, so interesting. There must be like a key combination or something that brings that back to normal. We'll figure it out. But anyway, that's what I mean. Like that's why it's the number one complaint I get, and the number one thing I got to work out with in teams that I'm on is to not talk implementation details when you are refining tickets with your product team, because your product team they don't care at all about anything that was in that Google sheet. Like any of the things I was talking about, any of whatever, it's like it doesn't matter to them. So why would you bother them with it? And if the response that I normally get is, well, that adds to the complexity of the ticket. Again, remember, story points aren't real, and it means that it could take more time. Well, you can bring that up without talking at all about database normalization. You can say, hey, there's like quite a few ways that we can store this data, so be aware that we will need the time to do that. And that's enough. And if they ask questions about why it will take time, again, like keep it as high level as possible, because even if your product owner was a developer before they got into product, I've seen it happen. They're really cool people to work with. Don't waste their time with it. That's not where their head's at. Just keep it high level. It's like, well, yeah, we could work through and like super normalize this database. We could just store them plainly, but both are like things that we would want to take the time to explore before we committed to one or the other. So that way, what you've done is you've said, hey, these are things that we need to consider when working on this, without saying this is what we're going to do, because that's not what these tickets are for. That's not what these tickets are for. That's what your planning meeting is for. That is what, when you are working actively on work like this, that's what your teammates are for, to, snag them and talk it through and put it together. But when you are looking at future work and ensuring that it's understandable, it's not for implementation detail. And that's the number one way to just kill your refinement meetings, is to sit there and do that. So don't do that. Don't waste your product team's time. Don't waste your own team's time on a discussion that should happen with the person who's actively implementing it. So there you go. Again, I indulge myself those discussions because I think database normalization's neat. I will go back and look and see why you would want to do it that way, because it's been a while since I've had to administrate a whole database. But none of those things matter for the context of what we're talking about today. So yeah, that's what we'll leave this at, because it should just be something that someone can send the data to, it saves it, and you're good to go. But it is something that is work that needs to be done, so that's why it's a ticket. Cool. Okay. I'm actually kind of feeling pretty good about this. It's been a while since I've done this whole exercise. It's surprising what, even for I think it was a short amount of time a couple of weeks ago, and then the however much time I've spent specifically on this to get you to a point where it's like, yeah, this is all that needs to be done. It's a very small amount of time. And now when this gets worked on by somebody, they know exactly what needs to be done. Everybody's got this shared understanding of what they should see in the end, and it will take them even less time because we put the effort in the beginning. So yeah, like, please remember that this is a good use of your time, even on your own personal stuff. Like, you don't have to, I'm going whole hog like this because I want people to know what it's like to do these different positions and like what it means. But even just taking the time to write this kind of thing out without thinking about development details, it's worth a lot of future time saved. So yeah. I'm trying to think if I want to open up Android Studio. I'm still having fun trouble with it, but and I've also not done any research on Compose just yet because I really don't want to. It's unfortunate that that's what my market's turned into, and I haven't had a project that was new enough to be able to work with Compose. So most of my work is handling legacy projects and legacy XML layouts and updating them to, constraint layouts and things that are a little bit more performant. But yeah, I'm wondering. I'm wondering if context would help make that easier if I just think about this better and write it in such a way that's. I wonder if that's okay. Because I can't think of any more tickets right now. Like, this is just. Like, we need something to show this. I think if it was a ticket left, it would be displaying the data in some way. But we can hold off on that until we have data to, like, manipulate and mess with. And maybe we will write that ticket because there isn't much time left in what I've got scheduled. So let's do that. Just show me it, Jira. Yeah, just it's a fascinating function. Like, I'll probably do this a lot while I go through, but like, I got to evaluate stuff like this all the time, and because of my tenure, I've had to go as high as, like, looking at how things are put together. I've also had to do it myself for projects, so, like, when I see something like that and it doesn't seem to really make sense from a user perspective, like, it's strange. It makes me wonder, like, how it came to be put together, because, like, as a user, that doesn't make sense to me, to have what I'm working on actively continue to move while I open other things, or if nothing is there, to make it like that little tiny thing off to the side. Like, it's fascinating. I wonder if it makes sense on a smaller screen, but who knows. Let's see here. So this is for what do we want to call this? That'll work. As a user, and you can go pretty crazy on this for, like, design. Again, since we don't have a design right now, I'm not going to, but it would be good to have a way to, like, visualize these. I don't think I want to give the user the ability to edit them right now, so, like, that's something that we're not going to do. I think really what I want is yeah, because there's no way to give it a title either. Interesting. That'll be a fun one to think about, is, like, what data gets shown. So, but we'll get into that. Like, oh, no. Oh, come on. And the G's cut off. Come on, guys. Really? Oh my god. Jira. God, you want people to pay for you. Anyway, I wonder. I'll have to pull that onto my smaller screen and see if that's reproducible. So acceptance. Add a button to the landing page. So I think we can do this. Like I said, if, when, then doesn't always work. What have I been calling these? Have I calling them views? Have I calling them paths? Page. I called it a screen and a page in the same thing. Jesus. Oh, page. All right, we're gonna go with page. Yeah, I think we'll just do timestamps for now. I wonder if there's a way to preview these in a way that makes sense, but without forcing it through something to like summarize and give it a title. There's really not an easy way to show it, but I think this will be okay for now, and then we can figure out like what it should actually do afterwards. But yeah, if I press the button mark entries, then show me a new page with a list of entries as a scrollable list of timestamps sorted from most to least recent. If I select a timestamp, we're going to do because I like being able to see that. If I select a timestamp, So we're going to add the button. If you press the button, show me a page with the list of entries, a scrollable list of timestamps in that format, sorted from most to least recent. If I select a timestamp, show me a new page with the journal entry at the top and the emotion selected in order of inner, middle, outer, below the journal entry. This should be good. Create that. Cool. And yeah, this should be the order this goes in. But it doesn't have to be. Like if I have multiple people working on this stuff, for the journal entry viewer, I would ask the developers to work together to figure out like a schema for it. Because really, like if it's showing timestamps, then you need something that can take on multiple timestamps in the format specified. Or, I mean, like, if you let them think about it for a minute, they would realize you just sort the timestamps first and then format them. But regardless, you would give them some dummy data in the format that you think it would be in, and let the developers decide on that themselves. Don't decide on that while you're grooming the ticket. And be able to show that, and then show it with some, dummy data or something. So that means that someone could be working on the viewer while someone else is working on the selection function, and all that work can happen in parallel, and then someone can at the end wrap all of them up and have that work out. And that's something that, as the product owner, they're not really thinking of that because they're more interested in the features that need to be done. But as a development team, you should be thinking about that, especially if you're one of the senior developers or above. Your first thought when looking at tickets should always be, how can this work be done in parallel? And whether or not there are pieces to pull out. And I know it takes me a minute to get there because I have to keep switching between my hats for writing as the product owner and then thinking as the developer. But that's the reason why these two functions here ended up coming out as their own thing, because we realized that for these two here, they're basically the same flows, just one starts with the emotion selection and one starts with the journal entry. So it makes sense to keep these as separate things that do their job well and on their own, and have them be their own piece, and then let the flow be built when the individual parts are put together. The other smart thing about this too, again, from a developer perspective, is if these are split into pieces like this, then they are separate and testable, and that is the most important. So it's the same thing when the product owner is working from an MVP. The developers should be doing the same thing as well at the smaller scale. Like, this landing page with a pair of buttons is the smallest deliverable thing we can put out there, and it does something. Would we deliver it to a user? No, because it's not done. But we're always thinking of what is the smallest deliverable I can do, and that's what this is. Like, if I had other stuff and it was like, oh, we'll build the feeling selection function, that's a small deliverable that I can release and not affect a user. Like, it's done and it's tested. It can be put behind a flag, or in this case, it wouldn't be connected to anything to start with. So yes, I can totally release that to a user. They'll never see it. But it can be done early so that it can be done, be tested and go through the iterations of code review and all that, so that when this I am feeling page story comes up, I've already got part of it done, and I just put that in there and complete it. So you always want to be looking, that's, if there was any implementation detail to be aware of while you are in your refinement sessions with these tickets. It is what can be split out and worked on individually, not how it can be done, but what is it. So that is something to always be aware of when you are getting tickets in, and it's also kind of why, especially with like big new features, you want high level ideas of what you're putting together, because then in partnership with your product team you can work through and see what can be further broken down and split up to be taken on by multiple developers, because yeah, that's one of the more difficult things, as a software dev to figure out, is what can and can't be done by more than one person. That brings me into my favorite analogy of, like, you can't make a baby in a month with 9 women, because the process has to work that way in order to put that thing together, and those things do exist when you're building features. And it's always a difficult discussion if someone doesn't get what that means, but always be on the lookout for what can be broken out. Like, we made it so that the I am feeling page could be worked on by 2 people at once, and then they can come together at the end and somewhat like pair program the last piece of it so it works. Or and the same thing too, the storing state, that's now we've split that into 3 people for that function, so all 3 of them can come together at the end and put that together and make sure that it works. It's cool, right? But the thing that you gotta do is you gotta plan in the beginning to do that. And this wouldn't happen unless we were taking the time intentionally to look at what's coming up and sit down and talk about how we want to put it together. And that's why these steps are so important. It's why you don't just dive in and start doing stuff, because then you end up screwing yourself in the end. So, yes, plan for things, plan for them. It showed today, like, the beginning of this whole stream was a ramble about Agile principles, which could have been a more focused one, especially since I've written a talk about it. Like, I have something I could have presented very easily about Agile, but I didn't, because I didn't plan on doing that. And had I planned better, then maybe I would have just spent the first hour and a half like actually giving a good presentation about Agile, instead of just showing the principles and giving you opinions. Like, planning matters, and that's why it's important. So yeah, I think with that, that's enough for today. I think we're okay. And we did exactly what we set out to do. We did a product day. So as always, if you got questions, or if you have more knowledge than I do about database normalization and why it's important, like, please tell me. I would much rather give people the right information. I will also research it myself so that I can talk about that in the implementation phase, because that's when it would matter. But I think that's enough of this for today. I'll make sure Android Studio is happy for tomorrow so that we can start putting something together and talking about how much I hate writing in Android and development. So thank you all for watching. I will see you tomorrow, hopefully.